What's up, Barnhill family, and welcome back to your home for all things combat sports.
Yo.
So the wait is over. Islam Makhachev has his opponent. It's an old foe, Charles Oliveira. You know, Charles went off and did what he needed to do to become the number one, the undisputed number one contender again in the division. Now, it's going to be tough, again, just like it was the first time against Makhachev, because he's got such a good style to match up against Charles. But do you see a way that Du Bronx could potentially pull an upset here or make things interesting?
As much as I'd like to say that, and I'm still excited for the fight, I just kind of know how this story's going to end. Islam Makhachev is operating on a different frequency than anybody else at the 155 division. Charles Oliveira has done nothing wrong. He is the next best guy on the planet at 155. But it just feels to me, unfortunately, like Islam Makhachev is going to have to run through some people that he's already beat as the champion, which could wind up tarnishing his GOAT status a little bit, simply because there's not enough new faces and new blood for him to go against at this present moment in the lightweight division. I'd love to see some new people in there against him, but Charles Oliveira shouldn't be just thrown to the sidelines because he already went in there and didn't get his hand raised.
Yeah, it's totally a Max Holloway-Volkanovski situation. When Max Holloway emerges as the clear-cut number one contender and there's not even anybody close, you got to run it back for the third time. And This is sort of, obviously not the third meeting, it's the second, but it feels very similar to me. Now, Du Bronx is a guy who can surprise you with really powerful striking. A lot of people talk about, and we have said on this channel, you know, Justin Gaethje being one of the most exciting fighters in the UFC, Dustin Poirier, and they're about to have their fight in a couple of weeks. But I think a lot of people overlook Oliveira sometimes as being truly one of the, if not the most exciting fighter in all of the UFC. Yeah. He puts everything on the line every time he gets out there. But when you go against a guy like Makhachev with that style, it can really come back to bite you. When we saw Volkanovski really give Makhachev some trouble, it was because he had a really calculated game plan. His striking was super dynamic, super calculated. He definitely improved on his grappling, working with Craig Jones and some really great wrestlers to work out of the bad spots that Islam was going to put him in. But Charles just throws caution to the wind. He marches forward and he comes right at you, which really allows Islam to set up those takedowns almost effortlessly. And that's kind of what I see happening in this one. I do think that Charles is going to make it a few rounds. I think he's going to make it more interesting this time than it was the first. And I think that's because Charles is a better fighter now than he was the first time. But unfortunately for him, I believe so is Islam. Islam is still in his early 30s. He's still coming into his prime. And as you said, I hope it doesn't tarnish Makhachev's sort of status on the GOAT list at 155, because I think when it's all said and done, depending on how long he sticks around, he could be one of the best 155ers of all time. If he beats Oliveira again, and then he takes on the winner of Dustin versus Justin.
Maybe has Volkanovski again.
Yeah, he's going to have that rematch with Volk down the road. If he sticks around another calendar year or two and has those fights, I think there's a real argument to be made, presuming that he wins all of them, that he is the best 155er that we've ever seen. Now, it's hard to eclipse Habib, his mentor, but I think just depending on how long he sticks around, he could do it. But my early prediction for this one is going to be Makhachev by submission again. I think he's going to be able to work in his takedowns. He's going to be able to do the ground and pound that he's so famous for, that Khabib made famous originally, and he's going to be able to advance the position on Charles. And I'm seeing another choke, honestly, whether it's a head and arm triangle, maybe he takes the back and slips in a rear naked choke. Something of that nature is what's going to get the finish for Makhachev again. I'm calling it third round submission for Islam Makhachev.
Wouldn't it be crazy to see Islam submit Charles Oliveira again, the guy who holds the record for the most submission victories in the UFC's history? But I kind of lean that way as well. Islam Makhachev is a very lethal striker because he has no fear of being taken down. Nobody's really looking to shoot in on Makhachev. And that's why his striking can be so open, and he can really be free in there when he goes on the feet with somebody. Now, Charles Oliveira is very exciting, and when he comes out there and looks to throw with people, he can land, but he also gets hit a fair bit. And in the first round of a Charles Oliveira fight, somebody's hitting the ground. Generally, it's Charles Oliveira, and then he works his way back up, and then if it's not against Islam Makhachev, he's usually getting his hand raised via finish somehow. But Islam's just a different animal. Those guys are so disciplined when it comes to game plan. They know exactly how to win each round. And now when you've got a guy like Charles Oliveira fighting from behind as the rounds start to dwindle down, you start to get a little bit more desperate. You start to get a little bit more exposed in your approaches and your entries and everything like that. And that's where Islam Makhachev really starts to shine. You give them a little millimeter of some sort of issue or flaw in your game, and they're going to expose it, and they'll take it like a mile. And then they'll wind up right on your back and you're not getting them off at that point. And while I do love a good rematch, I do feel bad for Charles Oliveira in this situation where I don't think he's made enough improvements as an MMA fighter with such a short span of time between their first fight and this second one that's going to take place. You know, Islam Makhachev is always evolving, and pretty much everybody at the highest level of this game is always evolving. But he had to get ready for Volkanovski, and he took that very seriously, just like Volkanovski did. I know he came up from 45, and a lot of people like to think that, oh, if somebody's smaller, they don't stand a chance against a bigger guy. But Islam Makhachev knew that that was the battle for the pound-for-pound number one spot. And if Islam was going to take it from somebody, it had to be Volkanovski, who was currently sitting at number one. So I always have to go back to what I've said many times on this podcast. If you fight a member from Team Khabib, you've just opened up a whole world of problems for you if you get a rematch with them. Because not only do they know now exactly what you're going to bring to the table, they also know exactly what they need to bring to beat you.
Yeah, for sure. And while Team Khabib, Islam and Khabib specifically, have not really been tested and proven in rematches because they've not really had any, I do believe that what you're saying is absolutely right. Once they have the ability to download the data on you, even in the first couple of rounds, you notice, come rounds 3, 4, 5, if it's a championship fight, it's a totally different thing, and they sort of have their way with you. Right. Now, as you said, Islam preparing for Volkanovski, he took that fight extremely seriously, as you should for a guy like Volkanovski. And make no mistake about it, in my opinion, Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski 1 was the highest level of MMA that the sport has seen to date. I don't think we've seen that level of skill put on by two fighters that are so evenly matched thus far in MMA's history. And that's saying a lot because we've had some great fights. But I believe that was one of the all-time technical masterpieces that the UFC has seen. So I'm really curious to see now, almost 7-8 months later, how much more Islam has improved from that fight with Volkanovski, because obviously when you have a war like that, it takes really being tested to really make jumps and improvement. And thus far, Islam, besides the one loss that he has, hasn't really been tested by anybody besides Volkanovski. Right. So I'm expecting him to be the best version of himself that we have seen to date, which the best version of Islam is something to really look out for.
Totally. And after Alexander Volkanovski's last fight against Yair Rodriguez, everybody was saying that's the highest level of MMA we've ever seen. He retook the number one pound-for-pound spot. He's the best fighter we've ever seen on the planet. Well, what do you call the guy that beat him just a few months ago? Islam Makhachev is definitely something special.
You call him the best fighter on the planet.
That's right.